Hello, Francois. Good to see you again.
Hello.
Quite a while. And Will, I see you. Hello. And there's this person whose screen says E924 something or rather. And I'm just so curious as to, I can't imagine that that's actually somebody's name, but you never know these days. So say hello to everybody. Put it in the chat, just put like your name, like, so yeah, wave, you can even say hi, and go ahead and put your name in your name and your location in the chat. All right, so this is a way to kind
Hi, everyone.
Yeah, so do.
I've just changed my name.
Okay. Oh, okay, Noxie, all right. And whenever you can, please turn on your mics. And so yeah, so in the chat, go ahead and put in your name and your location, like where are you right now? So we have a sense of where we are globally. Line in. Hello, William. Wow, that's a blast from the past.
Hey, Michael. Good to see you as well.
Wow.
And others.
Yeah.
Hi, William.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yanish. I've seen you.
Hello.
If at all possible, if you can, love to have your microphone, go ahead and have your mic on right now. We'll may ask you to turn them off and then on again from time to time. But now I think is a good time to have them on, your microphone and certainly your camera. John Belge, good to see you. Wow, years it's been since I've seen you.
Morning, Michael. How are you? Awesome to see you.
Doing well, thank you. Okay, and Olaf, glad you're here.
Hello.
Derek, calling in from vacation.
Yes,
See you.
I am.
Yeah, thank you for coming in. John, happy to see you. Don't know if we've met before, but I feel like maybe we have, and if we haven't, it's good to meet you. Stephen, welcome. Hello again.
Hello.
And Satish, I saw that you had joined a little earlier and then left and then came back. So I'm glad you came back.
Yeah, Michael, hello. I joined a bit early and then I rejoined.
Okay,
Yes.
good, cool. All right, so let's see. There's Ulrika is here. And hello, Ulrika. I can't see you, nor can I hear you, but I believe when Zoom tells me you're here, that you're here. So again, say hello. Feel free to say just hello. You can literally wave or say hi. This is a friendly crowd. And
Good morning.
Buongiorno.
yeah, buongiorno. Yes.
Good morning.
So someone's voice just got cut off.
It's me, Christine.
Christine.
I'm joining vacation, so I'm my internet is a little wonky and I'm on my phone. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, okay, great. Great to see you, Christine. I think it's been years since I've seen you as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, here comes Becky. So I think we'll get started. Actually, why don't we get started now? And there'll probably be some more people joining. Oh, good. Glad to see you on camera, Ulrika. Yeah, glad to see you. Okay, so we'll just kind of get this going. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Michael Hamman. And this is the first part of 3 sessions that we are doing. It's called the So What of Evolvagility. So there's some presumption that you've at least read the book, you've maybe seen the cover, you've heard of it, or maybe you're just like curious, like what the heck is this evolvagility thing? And so wherever you are coming from is perfectly fine. the way that these sessions will work is the sort of heuristic, if you will, of each of the sessions would be, we'll start out by just hearing from people, maybe sharing something, and I'll set that up in just a moment. Then typically I will talk about some aspects of evolvagility. And just to give you fair warning, you know, I've done lots. So the book came out in 2019, and I've been doing a number of different things that sort of are, you know, work with ideas from evolvagility. But I realized as I was, you know, kind of thinking about what to say today, that I haven't talked about evolvagility as a total practice. So for quite a while, strangely enough. So this is getting me back into the game. All of this is part of our launch of the Center for Inneragility. And a big part of, now there's somebody with some wind on your microphone. If you think that might be you.
It's Philip. Yeah, he fixed it.
Okay. All right. Great. I hate to. Okay. So, well, there's still somebody with.
He's going back and forth.
Okay. Okay. All right. Great. I think that did it. So, so the Center of Inneragility, just to say something briefly about it, is that the kind of the mission of the Center for Inneragility is to deepen our ability to examine what it is, the sense making and the meaning making that determines how we operate in organizations and in our leadership. And to have a set of technologies to help us grow and expand both our own capacity for inneragility and that of those around us. And one of the kind of key technologies here is what we call evolvagility. And I'll say we'll be talking about evolvagility quite a lot. But part of what we're up to in the Center for Inneragility is to create a community of practitioners who are able to facilitate what we call deliberate sense-making conversations or deliberate sense-making expansion. And so, and that's something we're going to be talking about today. It's all related to vertical development. And the premise, or the sort of the problem, if you will, that inneragility is intended to speak to or address, is that we notice that we keep saying be agile, but we have no idea what that really means. And so what we want to be able to do is we want to understand what does it mean to be agile and how do we facilitate its emergence. And I assert that we don't really know much about what it is to be in the first place, let alone be agile. And so part of the mission of inneragility is to make some of these things clear, but more importantly, to make them practicable. So for us to have a set of practices, a set of even facilitation modes that we can bring into organizations to help raise the level of inneragility. So it's an ongoing, this is going to be an ongoing conversation. So the So What of Evolvagility is these 3 sessions, but what we intend in the fall is to continue to go deeper into researching the practices of evolvagility, like what works, what doesn't work, what do we need to understand more clearly, what do we need to get better at, and how can we get better at those things. So it's really the commitment around evolvagility is for this to be a kind of a set of meta practices, much like say Scrum is a kind of set of meta practices, or you know, other ORSC is a set of meta practices. And so we have all of these different sort of meta practices or practice frameworks that we can bring to bear within organizations, and evolvagility is basically one of those. Okay, good. So before I get much further into this, I want to just start by finding out, so who has, first of all, and by the way, this is not intended to shame anybody at all. I have no interest in shaming anybody. I've shamed myself enough as it is. So But who has like substantially encountered the ideas of evolvagility? Maybe you've practiced them, maybe you've tried them. So raise your hand if that's true for you. Maybe you've tried it a little bit, but it didn't quite work, and they had, but maybe it did work. Okay, cool. So who has read the book? Raise your hand if that's you. You've read the book, right? And okay, great. And who has heard of the book or heard of evolvagility, but you haven't read it, and you're not, but you're interested in what it is? How many people are in that mode? Yeah. Okay. Great. That'll help us. So I think what I want to do is I want to find out like who. I see Christine had her hand raised. So here's how we'll do questions. So I'm going to be doing a fair bit of talking at the very beginning part, for part of the first hour, and then we're going to open it up into a conversation. And my experience is that when I can set the stage for the subsequent conversation, the conversation becomes the richest part of these sessions. So is this kind of like a quick question, Christine, or is this something substantive?
You had said raise your hand if you had read the book, so I was raising my hand for that.
Oh, okay.
Because I can't turn my video on.
Cool.
So.
Oh, okay. Great. Good. Okay. So I'm trying to, okay. I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go right into kind of speaking. I'm going to share with you sort of, this is a bit of an overview of evolvagility, but from a different perspective than you may have encountered if you've read the book. And so I'm going to talk for, I don't know, maybe 45 minutes. And then we're going to open it up to a conversation. So just bring this up. Okay. So so the whole idea of the so what of evolvagility really came out of a recognition that, I've been involved in many other things, and I have talked to a lot of people who they say that, they've been trying to do things with evolvagility and they've had some kind of success. And so partly what I wanted to do is just use these 3 sessions to find out, like, what are people doing, A, and secondly, to share kind of, my own emerging thinking about evolvagility. And partly to set the stage for what I regard to be a longer research project around evolvagility, around the practices of evolvagility for those who are really quite serious about bringing this into your organizations. Okay, so so evolvagility, I want to start by how do I make this so that, oh, there it is. Awesome. Perfect. Okay, great. So I want to start by giving a kind of definition of evolvagility. And one of the things that I'm wanting to do, welcome, Isabel, I see you. Hi, good to see you. One of the things I'm wanting to do as I'm kind of re-languaging evolvagility, I'm wanting to make the language a little more, if you will, a little bit more accessible without necessarily dumbing it down. So evolvagility could be said to be a set of distinctions and practices that help individuals and collectives have skillful problem-solving conversations that draw upon collective wisdom while at the same time enhancing that very wisdom. So there are a lot of sort of conversational modalities and sort of collective practices that teach us how to draw upon collective wisdom. And what we're up to here is, at the same time, we also want to enhance that very wisdom. So we want practices that do both of these. So, and this is both an individual and a social activity. In fact, you could say that evolvagility is really, it's a social kind of technology. It's designed for collectives, and a collective could be as few as 2 people. So that's the sort of the design of evolvagility. Okay, so so you could say that evolvagility operates across 2 axes. And those of you who have seen adult developmental literature or have read the book, you've seen this kind of diagram. So there's the horizontal axis. I'll just say a little briefly about it. The horizontal axis is the aspect of human performance that has to do with habit, that is kind of activated by our habits, things that we do without really necessarily thinking about it, you know. So there are a lot of habits that, you know, certain experts have that they've just developed as habits, and they're good habits. Some of them are not so good habits. So there are habits. There's skill, which are the things that we know how to do. So it could be like dexterous skill, like for people who use their hands and fingers. And then there's skill like, you know, like intellectual skill, cognitive skill, even emotional skill. So there's all manner of skills. And again, this is in the horizontal domain of performance. We also we have knowledge. There are things that we know, right? So many of us have a vast wealth of knowledge in various areas of expertise, whether it's, you know, ORSC, whether it's coaching, whether it's software development, you know, any number of areas we have habits and skills and knowledge. And you could say that all of these constitute the domain of performance, right? So, and these are all things that we can touch, we can look at, we can observe, we can sense how people are doing in terms of the performance. By the way, by performance, I don't mean, like performing on the stage, but every moment we're performing. You know, we're performing in relationship to an environment. So all of that is the horizontal dimension, or the horizontal axis. And then in the vertical axis, it's very different. This is the domain of inner perspective. This is like our capacity, for instance, to hold multiple perspectives. You know, how wedded are we to our own perspective? Is our consciousness, if you will, permeable to multiple perspectives, or do we get kind of hardened on perspectives? And sometimes, you know, it's a one or the other. And sometimes we're a little bit more open to perspective, sometimes we're less so. This is also the domain of awareness. Like, what can we be aware of, both within ourselves and around us? With other people, even awareness of what's going on in the world. And awareness, you know, it could be a kind of cognitive awareness, like awareness of what's going on, you know, in terms of climate change, right? You know, like information and, you know, like what's been happening. But awareness is also like, you could say that we could be aware of the field. There's a certain kind of, you know, consciousness field, if you will. How are we doing in terms of my Wi-Fi? I just got a message that it's let me know. Someone make a sound if there's any sort of disruption, because every
You
so
were breaking
often.
up a bit. You're back.
Okay. Was I gone for very long?
3 sentences.
Okay, great. All right, cool. All right, good. So that's awareness. And then a third area in the vertical dimension is our inner complexity, which is our capacity to make sense of very complex situations. And by the way, when we say make sense, I don't mean just necessarily just cognitively, but emotionally, like to be able to emotionally sort through the complexity of feelings we may have at certain moments in life, or in the face of certain situations that, you know, that trigger a complex variety of emotions, you know, which we often experience as confusing or as anxious. And so our capacity for emotional complexity, and all of this is what in adult development they refer to as meaning making, right? So meaning making is not just a cognitive aptitude, it's actually literally, you know, how we see the world, how how we interact with the world. And for the most part, we're unaware. This is a dimension of our performance, of which we are a dimension of our consciousness, of which we're, for the most part, unaware. Okay, so there are these two dimensions. Okay, now, the thing is that what we know, both from probably from our experience, but certainly, you know, from adult developmental psychology, is that as we grow vertically, so you'll notice that each of these axes are actually arrows, which suggest the potential movement toward growth, you know, toward greater capacity or toward greater competency or greater skillfulness. And as we grow vertically, it makes possible, it opens up an expanded range of skills and competencies that may or may not have been available before. So for instance, you might have a 9-year-old whiz child, and she's she's a really good, like a programmer. She's learned some programming language and she can do programming, but she probably won't be able to develop an operating system. So she wouldn't, because that would require a level of vertical development that simply wouldn't be available to most 9-year-olds. So this is an example of, as we grow vertically, the range of skillfulness and competency also becomes possible. It's not guaranteed because we have to develop those skills and we have to develop those competencies, but it becomes possible. They become available. And the other thing to say about this is that as we expand our skill and competence, it has the quality of vertical consolidation. It consolidates our whatever vertical gains or whatever developmental growth we have developed for ourselves. It tends to stabilize that and empower it in a way. And the other thing that it does is that it psychoactivates development. And we're gonna come back a little bit to the notion of psychoactivation, because the question becomes, how do you create environments? So the kind of the background question here for us might be, how do we create environments that elicit developmental growth? Because by definition, the dimension of development is kind of not accessible to us. And so this is a bit of a mystery. And it's a mystery that is part of the mission of the center, is to become masterful and create masterful practitioners in helping others grow themselves vertically. And so part of our mission is to sort of excavate that mystery and to make it so that it's not such a mystery. And actually, many people have done this. And this is an aspect of evolvagility that we'll get into probably in a future session, which is how to facilitate transformational learning, to use another term for vertical growth. Okay, I'm just going to pause for a moment. Let's breathe. Let me breathe. Okay. All right, good. So now here's the issue. Oftentimes what happens is that something, for whatever reason, it's usually environmental, but it's a complex range of reasons that we won't get into here. We may get into it if it becomes a question. That oftentimes vertical growth shuts down. It essentially stops, both whether for us as individuals, but more often in collectives. So for the most part, we operate in collectives. And what's happening collectively in terms of our vertical development tends to impact our own individual vertical development and vice versa. Be that as it may, for whatever reason, at some point, vertical development stops, whether individually or collectively, and hence the range of expanded skills halts as well. And so what happens is that we get stuck in the same old, we tend to try to apply the same old habits and skills that we learned out of a previously developed vertical growth spurt, if you will. But it no longer works because the situation may be more complex, more demanding. And so what happens is that further cements the arrested vertical development and becomes a kind of vicious cycle. It's very, very hard to get out of this. By the way, I always talk about vertical development in relation to horizontal development. I don't think we separate them out just, like you can separate molecules about, atoms of a water molecule just to be able to look at the atoms, but they really go together, right? So just to be clear about that. Okay, so we have this vicious cycle, and oftentimes we as individuals and organizations, in our teams, in our families, in our marriages, we're stuck in a kind of vicious cycle, and it's very hard to get out of it. So what we need is we need a set of practices that help us to break out of this vicious cycle in order to grow both horizontally and vertically. So we need both of them. We need to grow both across both dimensions simultaneously. So this is where certain kinds of practices come in, and Evolvagility is really. It occurred to me, like if I could say the simplest thing about Evolvagility, Evolvagility is just a set of practices that help us become more deliberate about the sense making that determines how we make decisions and how we collaborate and how we solve problems. That's really all it is. It's a set of practices. It's a little more than that. I would say, if I could add one more word, I would say a set of practices and distinctions, but we'll get into that maybe at another time. So it's a set of practices. And so, so we can think of Evolvagility as a mode of facilitation. Right. So those of you who have been in the Evolvagility workshops, some of you here have been there. We tended to teach Evolvagility as this is something that can be self-facilitated, and to a certain degree it can, but more and more I'm seeing this as a kind of layer of facilitation skillfulness, like facilitators can develop them so they can grow within themselves their skillfulness and their knowledge of these practices, which it becomes part of their facilitation toolbox, right? Just as ORSC practices become part of our facilitation toolbox. And, we have many, you could think of these as layers of competency or capability that we add to our facilitation toolbox. Now, the other thing I'm going to add kind of parenthetically here, and I don't know, we may or may not get into this, is that the presumption of all of this is to be able to facilitate or to catalyze developmental growth in other people or in systems around us requires that we come to a certain level in our own development. So this is as much about our own development and growth as it is, whatever actions we might take that catalyze developmental growth in others. So just saying that. Can't forget that. Okay, good. So here's the question. So as facilitators, whether it's a formal facilitation role or somebody, in some sort of collective setting is taking on this role, what are we paying attention to? And what we're paying attention to is we're paying attention to both the meaning-making dimension and the horizontal dimension, the performance dimension. We're paying attention to both of those. And we may get into this again, in the next session, and we could get into this in a question, that the main thrust, so in working with systems and organizations and bringing Evolvagility practices, we probably don't even talk about meaning making versus performance, vertical versus horizontal. Mostly this presents itself as a set of practices that have the effect of psychoactivating vertical development. So they're very specific practices, which when practiced can catalyze vertical developmental growth in us. So like an example would be when people study professional coaching. Many of you are professional coaches, and probably when you first started studying professional coaching, you had a number of ahas, right? And those ahas register in the vertical axis. They shift the way that we see the world. And so there are certain practices which, when we develop those practices and when we actually engage in those practices, catalyze a vertical shift for us. You could say that Scrum practices do that to a certain degree. It's a bit limited, but you could add an evolvagility layer to Scrum with your Scrum teams, which enhance the deliberate sense-making dimension, and so enhance that vertical growth potential that Scrum already has. I recognize I may be saying some controversial things sometimes. Okay, so let's just look at the focus for each of these. So we're gonna, so what's the focus in the meaning making in this meaning making dimension? And the main questions in the meaning making dimension. So again, we're I used binoculars, but maybe airplane cockpit is a better analogy. It's kind of like we're paying attention to all of these things. And among the things that we're paying attention to are the kinds of things that, that would elicit these questions that help us have some degree of access as to what's going on in this environment in terms of meaning making. And so, a kind of a sort of question we might ask is, what silently held assumptions seem to be operating here? What beliefs, what stories? So, for instance, you may be having a problem-solving conversation with somebody that you work with, and you have a long history of working together, right? And you've been very successful in your working relationship. And there are probably certain kinds of ruts that you get into, certain kinds of habits that block your ability to see the underlying assumptions, beliefs, and stories that might be determining how you're making sense of maybe a particularly stressful situation, or maybe you're in a conflict. And so it can be helpful when having a conversation like that to pause every once in a while and ask the question, okay, so what silently held assumptions might be operating here? What might we be assuming? Or another way to ask it is, what must be true for us to be seeing the situation the way that we see it? What must be true for me if the way that I see this conflict is that you're wrong and I'm right? So it's a way for us to whether, gently or maybe somewhat less gently, examine the assumptions and beliefs and stories that are there in the background, right? So I hope you don't mind me putting in parenthetical things from time to time. I'm going to put another one in here. As best I can tell, and I've been doing a lot of research in this whole area of transformative learning and vertical development, how to facilitate it, is that we can't really, we don't know how to get better. But what people have noticed is that to the degree that we can be disclosive and authentic with these kinds of questions, it reveals a domain in which it shifts the way that we see things. It literally shifts, how we see things. We start to see our assumptions operating elsewhere, right? So I'm going to leave that just as it is, and it might elicit a question during our conversation period. Okay, good. So that's one of the kind of main sets of questions. And so, and then following from that, in what ways might these be arresting our sense-making intelligence? So it's kind of implicit in the first question, but we want to make that explicit. Sometimes the assumptions and beliefs and stories that are there are actually empowering, right? And some of them are not. And so we want to be able to, we want to develop, a part of this is developing a kind of practice, a kind of disclosive, reflective practice, a practice by which we pause from time to time and kind of look underneath what's what's sort of driving the conversation? What's driving this activity? What's driving us to want to achieve this thing? What's driving us to get this product out? Right? What's driving me, right? You know, to get these ideas sorted out, right? Sometimes what's driving me is not necessarily very healthy. It may not be very empowering. So it's very useful to pause and ask these kinds of questions from time to time, right? And develop it as a kind of practice. Okay. So, by the way, I didn't really say this at the beginning. Please, I'm hoping you're jotting down questions. You can also put questions in the chat. And then, you know, we can come back to them when we get to that part of the session. Okay, so what we've just discussed are the kind of meaning making, like the point of focus for meaning making, right? Maybe some of the questions we might ask. Incidentally, I want to just reiterate that in today's session, we're taking a somewhat, I wouldn't say superficial, but a kind of a high level cut of this stuff. And then in the next session, we're going to go a bit deeper. And then the third session will go deeper still. All right. So there's a lot of things that I'm not going to get into today, just because I didn't want to overwhelm us. I wanted to favor this time, this first session, just for us to have actually to hear from you and to have some conversation. So so we're not going into enormous depth with things here today. Okay, so remember the binoculars. The first thing we're paying attention to is in the vertical realm, the realm of meaning making. And now we're looking, you know, in the realm of performance. We're looking at our habits, our skills. And so here are some of the main questions here. So in terms of how we're working together, what patterns of interactions can we observe? And in what ways do they help or hinder our capacity for sense-making intelligence? So patterns of interaction could be a certain person talks a lot, and another person doesn't hardly say anything, right? So we might, again, just as we paused before to examine assumptions, beliefs, and stories, we could similarly pause from time to time, and somebody might say, so I'm noticing that Sandra, has been really saying a lot, and that Joshua hasn't said very much. Or, that if I'm noticing that we're kind of talking over each other, or I'm noticing that one person will say an idea, the next person who speaks will say a completely unrelated idea, and then a third person will do the same. So it seems like it might be difficult for us to get on the same page. So these are all patterns of interaction that we can observe. I don't know how many of you have ever heard of Tavistock group relations conferences. It's something that I used to participate in a lot. And one of the things that's very interesting is that what you do in those things is that you sit in various group situations, small groups, medium-sized group, and then the very large group. And you sit in silence, and somebody might say something, right? And somebody might respond, but there's no goal. And meanwhile, you have two sort of trained facilitators, and their job is simply to observe what they notice in terms of the interactions. And it's just really interesting. They say it as neutrally as possible. I'm noticing that there's more males speaking in the last 10 minutes, and then not say anything. And what that does, and so I'll just put the rest of these up. So another kind of question is, what language practices do we blindly practice, and in what ways might they be hindering us? Or what is the manner, and I'll say something about language practices in just a moment. What's the manner and quality with which we relate with each other? Are we holding back? Is there kind of a guarded quality in our relationship? Are we, what sort of relationship interactions are going on, that might not be working for us. And so by pausing periodically to ask these kinds of questions, again, what it does is it helps us open up the lens of the camera. It helps us look at, kind of as object. It allows us to hold as object that to which we are otherwise subject, which is the group dynamics, which is, the meaning making that's kind of going on. For the most part, we're subject to that. We're unaware that all of that's going on. We're unaware of the interaction patterns that are happening. We're unaware of the language practices, or we're unaware of like what's the kind of quality of relationship that's going on. We might be aware that there's a certain tension in the room or whatever. We're aware of that, but we don't know what it is that's causing that or that's contributing to that. And I think there are people in the waiting room. I don't know if you can let them in. I'm noticing actually. You there, Annalene? Just going to go ahead and let them in.
Okay.
Okay, great. Okay, awesome. Annalene is also with the Center for Inner-Agility, and she's our, I don't even know, we haven't have a title. I would think of you maybe Chief Operating Officer, or I don't know, the person who makes the most important stuff happen, a miracle worker. So Annalene, if you come to more of these sessions, you'll get to know Annalene a bit more. She's usually a silent person in the background, making sure everything is working. So now by language practices, what I mean by language practices is for instance, a very common and not very productive language practice is to blame people, like to cast blame. You are this way, you're really domineering, Anna. You're very, or to make an assertion without any kind of evidence, or to make a an advocacy, to advocate for something without finding out how other people see it. So there's a whole range of language practices that are unproductive, just as there are a whole range of language practices that when we learn them, help us become productive. And those kinds of language practices are among the practices that Evolvagility teaches us. Okay, so all of these is in the domain of practice. So we've been looking at, what are the things that we are paying attention to in the domain, like in the domain of meaning making, right? By the way, I said practice is up here. The word should actually be performance, I realize. And we were looking at things in the domain of performance. What are the things that we're paying attention to? And as a facilitator, especially for groups or collectives or partners or whoever that are unfamiliar with this, I might sort of engage these questions, but after a while, other people start to pick them up. They become part of the vocabulary, the sort of conversational vocabulary in a group. Okay. So we're kind of coming toward the end of my talking so much. And then, so deliberate sense making, you could say, is a set of practices by which we stand back and observe the hidden assumptions, beliefs, and stories which determine how we are making sense of this moment. By the way, this kind of practice works better when we do it in real time. It can work retroactively. But the problem with retrospectives is that it's always very abstract. If we're going to retrospect on something that happened 2 weeks ago, we have no access. We have no real access to it. In fact, it's interestingly enough, when we do retrospectives, all we really have access to are the assumptions, beliefs, and stories, because the actuality of the moment has fallen away. The actuality of the moment happens in the moment. So these are Evolvagility is about practices that we can learn to bring in the moment. And to the degree that we can bring these practices in the moment, it empowers us enormously to endeavor toward continuous improvement moment by moment. To stand back and observe the patterns of interaction that define how we operate together, the language practices, and the manner and quality with which we relate with one another. So kind of, like you could say fairly simply that this is what deliberate sense making does. Are these things. They help us engage in these sorts of practices. So the last thing that I want to say, at least today, and again, we'll take a deeper cut in the next session, which I think it was actually next Tuesday. So you go about your normal problem solving or whatever conversations and activities you're engaged in, whether it's with you and a partner, with a team. Typically, this is a social activity. It could even be by yourself. You could actually engage these practices. You're just, by yourself as well. But we kind of add a wrapper. So evolvagility practices are a kind of wrapper that we wrap around whatever it is that we're already doing. So I want to break up the notion that these are practices that we have to kind of set time aside to do. This idea that in order to grow ourselves developmentally requires that we always go away someplace to some retreat setting where we can kind of focus on our inner development. And sometimes that's really valuable. I find it to be also really valuable to do that kind of work in the kind of grunt and grit of day-to-day, moment-by-moment work that we're doing together. And to the degree that we can do that work in the very context of what it is we're dealing with moment by moment, it accelerates our ability to deal with situations more powerfully, and perhaps even more importantly, it helps us develop a vocabulary, a deliberate sense-making vocabulary that just becomes part of our conversational milieu. So I think that's all that I had. So I'm going to stop sharing, and it's nice to see you all. Okay, so we'll take a break maybe in about 15 minutes, but I want to just kind of start the kind of conversational part of this going. And maybe what questions do you have, or maybe what's, overwhelming to you, underwhelming to you. And so typically the way this goes is that somebody will ask a question or make a comment, and typically I'll interact with that person, and that tends to stimulate other thoughts. And so, after about 10 minutes, we'll start to get into this. Okay.
So Michael, this seems to build a lot on just emotional intelligence. And I'm curious, the distinction that you're making between evolvagility and emotional intelligence.
Well, I would say that evolvagility, the design of it, is to get further underneath that. I mean, my experience with working with emotional intelligence is that it doesn't provide enough of a vocabulary or a language or set of distinctions. So we haven't gotten into that in this session. So part of what evolvagility is a set of ideas and distinctions, which when we grapple with them, they shift the way that we look at things like upset, like emotional upset. Like how do we look at, how do we, okay, how do we deal with emotional upset, for instance? And so part of what evolvagility offers is a kind of a framework of distinctions and ways of asking questions and specific kinds of conversational practices, and a design for the kind of collective, the kind of holding environment. So we're starting to get into things that I would have introduced next time, but that's fine, right? So there's a kind of synchrony of different elements, which when they come together, it amplifies our capacity to look more deeply at these things. and as we look more deeply at these things, it affects us in a different way. One of the things that we like to say about this kind of work is that, we know that this work works when the people around us are getting better. Well, I don't know if I'm getting better, but the people around me are getting better, right? So there's something in my way of dealing with people, dealing with situations that shifts the manner in which they occur. And so part of kind of the way that Evolvagility works is, which, I'm saying a little bit about now, and I'll say more about probably next time, is it's not just, like us talking about things. It's the way that we talk about things. And it's the particular vocabulary that we exercise when we talk about things, all of which, when you combine that with the set of agreements that we have as a collective, when we do this sort of work together, all of that combines to accelerate the rate at which we're able to develop this deliberate sense-making intelligence. Is that a useful response? Helpful, John?
Thank you. Yes.
Okay. Anything else, John? Okay, great. But seriously, was that illuminating, or are you just saying like polite yes?
No, I'm not. It's not courteous compliance. It was helpful.
Yeah.
What I heard was, well, here's how I interpret it. It's almost like building emotional intelligence within a collective as opposed to the individual.
Yes. That's part of it. And it's also doing it by introducing distinctions that sort of challenge our ordinary way of thinking about things. So I'm just kind of adding another layer of depth to that. A big part of how this kind of work or transformational learning works is that it inevitably at some point we have to there's going to be some sort of breakdown in our ability to deal with things, because we have a certain habit, we have a certain habitual patterns of meaning making, and they're invisible to us. And part of the work of Evolvagility is, in a sense, to stand some of those known categories on their head. And people often experience this as kind of moments of could be mild or strong confusion. And in that confusion, the possibility for a different category, a more enabling category, becomes possible. Cool, great, thank you. Okay, Ken.
Yeah, my network bandwidth's slow. Hopefully I won't be cutting out. Can you hear me okay, Michael?
Yeah, I can.
Good. Yeah, like I'm kind of curious about where you've seen this work and make an impact in organizations and with groups, like the set of distinctions and practices and the elevation and the vertical development. I'd love to hear more about where that's been effective and how you've helped leaders kind of understand and resonate with this. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, that gets into so the way that I'm talking about this stuff here is not the way that I would talk about this with, normal people. The way that I would talk about this with normal people is, that I would start by, so one of the things that I do is I work with leadership teams, and I always start by, what is it that's giving you headaches as a leadership team? And then invite them to have a discussion about it. Some challenge in this leadership team. And I invite them to have a discussion. And what I do is I design with them that I'm going to, from time to time, I'm going to break in and offer an observation or a question, right? So I'm going to, or I might even do a little bit of live coaching with somebody. And what I do is that depending on where they're at, and we can all sense where people are at, I'll simply ask a question, or I'll point something out. So I might say something like, so here's what I noticed, maybe to use the example, this is something that actually happens quite a lot. What I notice is that Jonathan said this thing, and then Sandra, she spoke immediately after Jonathan, but didn't respond at all to Jonathan. She started saying something completely different. And then Kate responded to Sandra with yet a third statement. And then I won't say anything. And then it becomes up to them to determine how they want to deal with that. And so it all depends on where people are at. And part of our job as coaches and facilitators is to be able to sense where people are at, or where systems are at vertically. I mean, most of us here can kind of sense that. And part of among the tools of Evolvagility is just developing that ability to be able to sense, like, what's in the air developmentally, what could be tolerated, what couldn't be tolerated, and always wanting to push the edge just a little bit, but doing it in a very friendly way. So again, I said earlier that so much of this is about your own development, your ability to be in relationship with people, for instance. For some of us, for me, being in relationship with people is fairly natural, right? But for some people, it's not so natural. And so that's something for some of us that we need to kind of develop, which is, how to be in relationship and how to manage my, maybe my anxiety, maybe my triggers. And, when I work with leadership teams, I'm filled with anxiety, as many of you probably are as well. And I know many of you are filled with anxiety. I get massively triggered, and it's a personal development thing to be able to kind of just manage that and stay present, so that I can then continue to be aware of what's going on. So I don't know, there was a range of potential directions that question could have taken, and I don't know if my response in any way went in the direction you were hoping, Ken.
Well, that's okay. Right. Yeah, I was more along the lines, I guess I was kind of looking for stories of where this has worked, or, some examples of, what organizations or what leaders actually resonate with this approach. And I understand we adapt the approach, and part of that as the coaches is our responsibility to grow our ability to connect with them in multiple different domains, I guess you could say, right? But I was kind of looking to see, like, how this tactically has been applied. Where have you seen it work in an organization? Where you've seen the meaning making and the vertical development occur as a result of this? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. So
yeah.
The ideas, that eventually made their way into Evolvagility came from my consulting practice, came from my, when I, for years and years, I was, basically an enterprise coach, and a big part of what I did was work with leadership teams and work with whole systems and work with, software teams and work with individuals. And I came from a professional coaching and transformational facilitation background, right? And so so what I found myself doing is simply asking questions and offering observations along the lines of what I shared with you earlier. And just, whenever and wherever it seemed like it might make a difference. And what started to happen is people started getting really interested in that. And some people didn't. So it's not everybody responds to this. But I believe, and part of the commitment of the Center for Inner Agility is to build over the coming months a kind of baseline of mastery, in doing this work, because part of what I've recognized is that, I've been woeful in really being fully committed to helping people develop mastery in this work, because evolvagility, it's not an answer. It's more like a question. What if this were possible? And having said that it comes very much from my own practical experiences and working with people and working with systems and organizations over many, many years. And it also comes from, people in the OD world who do this kind of work. Even other people in the agile world, who I've watched work.
That's awesome. Yeah. So it's basically standing in a space of curiosity and possibility for this.
Yes, indeed. And with a commitment to mastering. So I can tell you that our commitment at the Center for Innergility is over the coming months to create a kind of learning community for people who want to develop mastery in this. And part of this is going to be research. So I'm planning to have a kind of a 6-month graduate seminar where and if you've ever been in a graduate seminar, what it is there's the topic of the seminar, and then different people do research and they present the research, and it gets critiqued by other people and by the professor. And in this case, we would, I would teach aspects of this. People will go out and try it, and they would find out, oh, wow, this is really hard. And then we would put our heads together to kind of design, okay, so what else needs to be designed more completely, more thoroughly in this work in order to help us do blah. So one of the biggest questions I get from people is, how do you bring this kind of work into a largely achiever-oriented environment, which most environments are? And it's a really good question. I think I kind of know how to do it, but I don't know what it is that I know. And so part of what I'm envisioning over the coming months is those of us who are committed to mastery in this work, committed to bringing this kind of work as a kind of aspect of the work we do as coaches and facilitators, to get better at this.
Awesome. Yeah. And use okay. So it's to get a little bit, obviously to get more tactical, but it's also to get a little bit more research based in combination with standing in that possibility and curiosity. And okay. Yeah. So building a sort of feedback loop on all of these practices and distinctions and ways of being.
Yeah. It's going to take a lot of us to do this together, right? I can't profess to have all the answers. You actually, all of you probably have a lot of answers, and you may not know it. And so part of this is just sort of like establishing a baseline and literally creating a kind of body of practices, could even end up becoming, a second book, that, of which, there are 30 authors, for instance. Okay, great. Now I saw someone, so I see Francois. Was there someone whose hand was up a while ago that I missed? Did I miss that? Was it Stephen maybe? Oh, I saw. Okay.
Yeah, it was me, Michael, but you kind of answered it in your explanation there. So.
Oh, okay. Okay, great. Okay, yeah. Cool.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, Francois, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to offer some resonance of the picture you used with binoculars, because that picture actually brings it down to something very easy to understand, even for leaders. If you have one part of your company looking at the left part and another part of the company looking at the right part, your team leader looking at performance and your HR group looking at individual development, then you're probably inhibiting some growth just by the structure of your company. And that being said, that's just the level of the social level. Of course, if you do that at the individual level, if you just try to improve your skills and not your perspectives and not your hidden assumptions, then you'll hit the glass ceiling too. So I think that that picture there spoke much more to me than the two arrows with the 2 dimensions, just personally. So I just wanted to offer that as a resonance, as something that can probably be developed. It's a very good thing to have the 2 distinct, parts of your binoculars, but you need a brain behind them to put that together as stereoscopic view.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that's essentially what you're saying, and thank you for that, and that resonated quite a bit. It's giving me some food for thought. So I just wanted to offer that back.
Great. Thank you for that. Great. So I want to invite us to take a break in just a moment, but I want to find out. So how is this going? Is this for how many of you is this satisfying your expectations, what you were hoping for so far? For how many? Maybe you could raise your hand or yeah, keep them up just so we can all see kind of how this is going. Okay, great. So could somebody offer what might be helpful? And then we'll hear that maybe a couple of you, and then we'll come back. We'll take a break and then we'll come back. What might help you? It's going to be a brave soul. Yes, Sabina.
Could you speak a little bit more about psychoactivating? Because I hear this word a lot, but I don't really understand what you mean. Sorry for the background noises here.
Okay, so say something about psycho. So I'm going to write these things down. When we come back, we can start to do this. So psychoactivate. Okay, great. All right, good. Anything else, Sabina? Okay, awesome. Who else? What do you need to have this work for you really optimally? Yes, Jonas.
I think from my perspective, I've been trying some of this stuff, and I've been to your training and read your book as well. So I think it's more in the complexity, but I guess that's something that will show up as we go, not right now.
And what is it that I didn't quite catch what it is that is maybe missing or you wanted more of? Or
yeah, I mean, but the challenges show up as you do this. Like you could have a team where you have meetings and you conduct meetings in a new way, or you add a new type of meeting. That is a sense-making meeting where you kind of capture everything that the team wouldn't capture, or you create something new with other people in the company. Or in units where you create something new. But I've found that the greatest challenges is, I don't know, my expectations maybe is playing in here, that the expectation is that I want to find someone else that resonates with this kind of stuff, so that it's not a lonely journey.
Yes, yeah. Well, what I can say to that last comment is that you can't. This is not work you can do by yourself. Like if you're alone in an organization, you want to be a part of a community, and part of what we're up to here at the center is to actually create a community of interest and a community of practice, and to have a variety of ways to create a variety of ways in which people can come together and deepen their skills, and so on. Because it's just really hard to do this sort of work just by yourself.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of inspiration comes from a community that helps you to see things in a new light as well. And that doesn't seem to happen when doing this within the company, I think.
Great. Maybe one other person, something that you feel like you could use that could help this go better or be more useful or more, whatever.
Maybe a quick one. To me, this is the clarity of what you just explained, and the meaning making. In fact, it is applying vertical development to vertical development. I mean, in the sense of now I have the feeling that I'm able to better explain, or not explain, but meaning making with organization. I would like to address this approach. So today I saw much more. To me, it's really clear, and this is what I am expecting to not coming with the concept of AD stuff, difficult to handle, or people they don't know how they could use it or organize this, and as Francois said also, there are some synergy with human resource and for example CEO, or that's exactly what I'm looking for. In fact, is to be really concrete and impactful, explaining the approach. So, yeah.
Well, that's again, just like anything else, it takes some degree of mastery, really to do that. And again, that's partly what we're committed to, is creating the kind of community in which that mastery becomes possible. Is that hand? Is that? Oh, Stephen, please, and then Sabina, and then after this we'll take a break.
Michael, for some reason inside of me, I'm getting the sense that in relationship is a very big component of this, not only with yourself, but with creating. I guess my question is, how do you create an environment of results-oriented leaders to be more in relationship with each other, with themselves, so that they're open for that vertical development? Because that's, I think that's an unlocking part to this evolve agility, if I'm gathering this correctly.
Yeah, I think okay, good. So I'm going to actually write that down, and we can speak to that when we get back from the break. Okay, last call. Anyone else? What would help this be more useful for those of you that? Okay. All right, Sabina, please. Oh, there you are. Okay.
Is the graduate program different from the program you start in September, and the learning community? How do they differ or not? Or
how does this differ from the program that I talked about with you?
Yeah, the graduate program is different from the one that starts in the mastering program.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Great. Okay. So thank you, Sabina. All right, so let's take a just take a 5-minute break, and we'll come back, and we'll start tackling some of these other things. Cool. All right. See you. Okay. Welcome back. So I want to share with you one last slide, just to kind of hit on some of the things that have been asked about, and then I'll address the questions that have been asked. So give me a second here. So I want to just say one last thing about in the kind of the the elements of the aspects of evolvagility. So the first thing, so you could think of evolvagility as a set of elements or a set of practices that all kind of come together. And something I want to say about evolvagility is that it's not it's not like, it's more like an operating system, or more like even an API than it is a set of specific solutions. And part of what the center is about is helping us develop like real world tactical applications of this. So the first aspect of Evolvagility is reflective and disclosive action. And so this is, again, these are practices, largely conversational practices that encourage us to uncover aspects of our meaning making of which we're unaware. And I think this is one of the things that is really important, that we often talk about the importance of self-awareness. And but self-awareness doesn't really, self-awareness needs to be sort of stimulated. Like there are many things of which I'm aware in myself, but the things that might actually be most limiting to me may be things of which I'm unaware. And so part of this is having practices and distinctions that reveal aspects of ourselves, whether individually or collectively, that we otherwise can't see. So that's one sort of dimension here. The other is that we need to have some way, some practices that are developmentally stretch us. And this is kind of similar to what I've been saying before, that it's not enough to just become aware of that of which we're already always aware, that we need to start to see aspects of ourselves, again, individually and collectively, that we otherwise don't see. That and it requires that we kind of open up new categories for looking at things, which can be really disoriented. So in the world of transformational learning, they talk a lot about disorienting dilemmas, the importance of certain kinds of meaning-making dilemmas, which we experience as stressful. We experience them as maybe crossing a kind of edge for ourselves. And yet, in the right kind of environment, we can be encouraged to do so. So that brings me to the next element, which is a holding environment. So in order for us to do this kind of work, we need a social environment that that inspires and develops us to take sort of developmentally courageous action. And in the adult development, they refer to this as indeed as a holding environment. And it has these two different elements, one, or these two aspects, one of which is that it's socially supportive, that we are supported, that we are encouraged, right? And when we fall down, when we make mistakes, there's going to be nobody holding it over us, right? So there's a kind of support. So if you've been on really powerful teams where there's a lot of disclosive energy, there's a lot of support. There's a sense of emotional, that we hold each other with emotional regard. At the same time, we also need like psychological challenge. So we need psychological support and safety, but also we need psychological challenge. We need to have a social environment in which we're encouraged to cross those edges for ourselves when they are particularly hard, when they're particularly maybe frightening or maybe disorienting. And so having an environment that both supports us as we go through these developmental moves, and an environment that also challenges us, is part of it. So you could think of this as a synergy, like four atoms that are required in order to make the constitution of the whole, which would be a molecule, or maybe four legs of a table might be another analogy. And the fourth leg is finally is a sense of shared commitment, that there's a structure that encourages us, that supports us, enables us to have a commitment to bringing this sort of angle to our work, whether we're a team, whether we're a partnership. And all of that, the synergy of all of that, is sort of what creates the emergence of this quality, this environment that accelerates our growth and development. So I wanted to just share that with you because there were questions that seemed to suggest that this might be useful. Okay. All right. So any questions or comments that elicited?
So Michael, I think for me, the piece that I struggle with, because I understand all of the things that you're explaining, kind of. Are there examples that you could share and like kind of point out how all of these pieces are a part of that example so that I can really understand what that looks like or what it could look like in a given situation? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, and it sort of resonates with something that a couple of others have added. So let me asked about. So let me go back to that slide and see if I can bring up an example that. Now here's the danger with examples. When I share an example with you, it's going to be an example that resonates with my own sense making. And so I think what I would want to do with maybe several of you is us to create an example together, and I'll seed it, right? So let's just start with the notion of a holding environment. I'm going to give you an example of a leadership team that I worked with actually for quite a while. They became a really, really powerful leadership team. They started out, I mean, they were reasonably good, but each of them kind of had their own sort of silos, and they had their own things that they were working on, their own concerns, and they weren't working as a team. And and they realized that in order to get their sort of their lean agile, so they were really into lean and agile. It was a huge. They had an IT part of it, but they also had a big operations part of it. It was part of a large credit card company, and so the first thing that we did is we created this holding environment, and so I started out by leading a conversation around, so what's something that's challenging to you as a leadership team? What's one of your biggest challenges? And what they shared with me is that that the people, in their organization are just not operating from the same page. And so I asked the question, so I posed this thought, consider that whatever it is that's going on in the organization is also what's going on in this leadership team. Just consider that. And let's just play a thought experiment. So notice the languaging that I'm using. I'm not saying that this is so. I'm inviting people into a thought experiment. Let's have a thought experiment. What if that were true? What might you say about this leadership team that would reflect that? And a number of people said a number of things that pointed again to the fact that they sort of operate in their own worlds, and they don't really work together. And then I invited them to consider, so what would you need? What sort of structure would you need to be able to support yourselves to become such a leadership team? By the way, this occurred over maybe a couple of conversations, and fast forwarding it. And and this is where we got into designing the holding environment. This is very much like designing an alliance. And in this case, it was designing the alliance for, like, how do we want to work together more effectively? How can we become more of a team? And as they did this work, I continued to pose thought experiments and ask provocative questions, all of which started to bring about the emergence of this reflective and disclosive environment, that people started to disclose more and more what was going on, what was really true for them that they might not otherwise talk about. And again, this occurred over some amount of time. And those conversations, they became developmentally stretching for them. To hear one person give another person feedback, very direct feedback, was really, really hard to hear. But in the holding environment that we'd started to create, the sense that it was safe and okay, that I didn't suddenly become a terrible leader because I got this feedback, that it became okay to get, not only to be able to hear this sort of hard feedback, but to actually start to give this sort of hard feedback to other people on the leadership team. There were 5 people on this leadership team. And over time, people started to see ways that they could bring this work into their organization, into their first into their own kind of individual departments, but then they started to see ways that they could bring this across multiple departments. And all of this, from this started to emerge a kind of a commitment to this practice. And so this became a weekly meeting that we had. So there was the executive VP, and then there was the other VPs and senior directors. So how does that land for you? So I'm just going to find out. I want to engage. How did that land for people as an example? So this is where we get into a kind of sense-making conversation amongst us. Because if you're going to ask me for an example, I'm going to ask you to respond and to engage with the example, because it took me some work to do that.
So I asked, so I'll respond. I was going to kind of let other people jump in and not continue, but it was helpful to me. So it resonated, and it makes sense kind of what you're saying in terms of this is the how, or one example of the how. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. So what is one thing that opened up for you? What maybe a new possibility or something that opened up for you? Notice, by the way, that I'm asking a question. Oftentimes when we do this, have these kinds of conversations, we'll say things like, that was very helpful. By the way, I don't mean to be critical of you, Christine. We all do this, right? So that was helpful, right? And so now I'm making a courageous move to ask for something a bit more. And I've set the stage by offering the thought that, so I just shared something with you, and now I want people to engage with this. So what new possibility did that open up for you? Maybe just one possibility.
Do you want me to answer, Michael, or do you want somebody else to jump?
You, because you.
So I actually work with a leadership team that is very similar to the one that you described. And what it did for me is it showed me where I might begin, and how I might be of service to them in a way that's different than what I've already kind of been doing. And it also, so I think, we're all kind of reading your book. And so it also will give me the opportunity for them to participate in something that is an example of what they're reading about, which hopefully they can then internalize and potentially use beyond just our group.
Right.
So it's exciting for me.
Cool. So now, here's the thing that, and we'll get into this more next time. We'll get into, the notion of deliberate sense-making conversations, that we have to be deliberate in how we have these kinds of conversations, because conversations they're already always patterned. They always do. And it takes something to break that pattern, but to do it in a way that doesn't come across as brusque and rude, right? And so one of the things that we would want to get pretty good at is how to facilitate, how to engage people in these deliberate sense-making conversations, so that we move beyond the usual patterns that we have, in which there's really no new possibility. That's that vicious cycle that we're in. That vicious cycle exists everywhere. And so part of what Evolve Agility is about is kind of developing a backbone for ourselves, but also developing, certain practices and skills, which can be practiced, which can be learned, which can be developed, such that we can then enter into these sorts of more masterful conversations with people. It's amazing. It doesn't take very much, actually. And those of you who have been in courses or, done this work could probably attest to that. It doesn't take that much. Cool. Thank you, Christine. So I want to hear something from a couple of other people on this. I just like the example that I just gave. This is the most common thing is what's an example of, and I just want to find out. So what did this help you see? What's the sense that you make of things given that example?
I can maybe make a comment,
Yeah.
Michael.
Yeah.
I think that you already pointed out that one should be very careful about the language one is using in dealing with leaders in an organization, because I think that in most cases, if you start talking to them about vertical development, awareness, consciousness, they will not understand what you're talking about.
No,
right? So,
absolutely.
So I understood your approach was to actually talk about their headaches, their challenges, their problems, listen to them, and then put forward some propositions to perhaps have a different look or consider having a different look at certain aspects of their cooperation as leaders, and perhaps slowly then pull them into in certain direction. But unfortunately, they will not understand this whole theoretical.
No, of course not, and they shouldn't. They shouldn't need to, right? I mean, so I'm a geek for this stuff, right? And like a big part of my work is that I train and coach and help people develop these sorts of capabilities in themselves, right? That's what I do. To borrow Michael Spade's term, my work is to transform transformers. You all are transformers, right? And so, but we're not going to use this language, with other people, right? You have to meet people where they are at developmentally, and that, but you don't stay there, right? You enact certain you make certain provocative conversational moves, and that start with what people are dealing with right now. So like for some years now, I've stopped doing workshops and training sessions for leadership teams. I just don't do it. Instead, what I do is I offer to have a series of coaching sessions with the leadership team. And I start just exactly as I just gave the example. So what's your biggest challenge as a leadership team right now? I don't have them fill out a questionnaire or a form or something ahead of time, because it's boring. It's not, because it's not alive. It's got to be alive right now. And so what Evolve Agility teaches us is it teaches us a certain kind of set of meta practices, and partly what we need to develop. I mean, for those of you who are interested in developing this and developing some capacity, some ability here, is to have examples, and then find places where it was really hard, and let's uncover what was hard about it, and fill in what needs to be filled in on those practices. But in my view, to do this kind of work with people, you've got to start with literally where they are at right now. Is that useful, helpful for you, Janusz?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. So others. I notice a lot of people's cameras are off. So, so there were some questions earlier. Psychoactivate. What do I? Who would like to share what you think what we mean by psychoactivate?
I can share my opinion about that and see where it takes us.
Good. I was hoping to hear your voice, William.
Thank you. Yeah, for me, there's this aspect around when we work with groups of people where we can actually elevate the group intelligence. Torbert talks about it where all the levels are within us, but sometimes like people get epiphanies. So this is one where you work with a group, and by holding that space for them and doing intervention with them, you can actually elevate the intelligence. So that's a way for me to see of like people then get to experience a higher level or deeper, depending on which way you look at it. And so they might come down afterwards, but then they've had that experience, and there's something in them that they can strive to go for them.
Yeah. And yeah, that's great. So, and where does all of that happen? Like that, that moment of seeing something new, where does that happen?
Sometimes during the conversations, as things happen, they will, like, let's say somebody is just holding one perspective, and that's where they at. That's their developmental level or consciousness level, and all of a sudden they get to the realization, oh, there is not one truth but truths, and all of a sudden they get to, oh, both of us can be right. My point of view is valid, the other person's point of view is valid as well. They might leave the room and keep advocating for their own point of view, but while they were in the conversation, they could have got that glimpse where, oh, there's some truth on that other side as well.
Yeah, good. So I want to build on that, William, and make a kind of a teaching point here, really important teaching point, that the sort of inner transformation we're talking about here is not like a one and done thing, to use a sort of an American term. It's not something that happens just once. The way that I talk about it in the book is that what happens is, in that moment in the conversation, William, this person had a state experience. They saw some new possibility, right? They weren't ready to fully live into that possibility. But when you repeat these state experiences, this is why it's really useful to work with systems over the course of time. When that state experience happens again, through whatever intervention we're bringing as facilitators of this work, when that happens many times, it becomes something not so much that we remember. I must remember to be able to hold other people's perspectives as valuable. It's not like a rule to remember. It literally becomes how we are. We become one who is now, we find ourselves able to hold others' perspectives. And we may not even notice it at first, right? And then at some point we might notice it, and it's like, wow, that's really strange. Or somebody might even comment on it. And that's the way that inner transformation happens, right? And again, to go back to the question about the difference between this and emotional intelligence, again, I haven't been fully trained in like how to facilitate emergence of emotional intelligence. But one of the things that I've learned from in doing this kind of work is that you don't teach people how to develop by teaching concepts or teaching conceptually. You teach people how to develop by putting them in category breaking moments where you say something or ask a question that stands something on its head for that person. How many people understand what I'm talking about right now?
Yeah.
So we all have had experiences in doing that. whether we had the experience ourselves or we facilitated that experience in others. And much of what we learn in professional coaching has a lot to do with that. And among the practices of evolvagility is just is actually, you know, engaging in the kinds of language practices that have that effect with people.
Yeah, and I want to say there's some good things that came into the chat as well. So Olaf, if you want to share that as well, feel free.
Yeah, great. Yeah, yeah. And those of you who know me, who've been in my online classes, know that I don't read the chat because it's enough for me to just stay present with people, you know, and stay present with the energy. And for me, this is an unfamiliar thing that I'm doing. The thing that I'm doing in this session is unfamiliar for me. So it's like I've got to even be more kind of tuned into what's happening. Okay,
Yeah.
so what is it, Olaf? I would love to hear what you have, Olaf.
So I think of psychoactivating as sort of the idea of making someone aware that there's a red pill or blue pill, like from the Matrix movie. But not asking them necessarily to choose to take one of them, but just to make them aware that there is this idea and that, you know, maybe they need to think or want to think about, is the red one interesting to them? Do they want to take it?
Yeah. Right. So now in order to, so something has to happen in order for people to understand, you know, really the distinction you're making between red and blue pill, right? That you're pointing to something. And for some people, they may not get it, right? And so, and for some people, they do get it. And so part of psychoactivating something is to use, like, this is what I love about the blue and the red pill metaphor, because, you know, many people have seen the Matrix, and so they kind of get the reference, right? So it's a passageway into something, into, you know, like a certain kind of distinction. You know, just to build on what you're saying here, one way that I would say about psychoactivation is that it's bringing something that's familiar to somebody that they can recognize, but it has a Trojan horse in it, right? So when they engage with it, you know, for long enough, like they realize that it's actually something else. So the other thing that I would say about psychoactivating is that psychoactivation usually happens through practice. It can happen through language actions, like William was describing and you described, Olaf. But it also can happen just through practices. So for instance, my favorite example is, you know, professional coaching. When we learn professional coaching, it psychoactivates a shift in us. So certain kinds of practices, like certain kinds of conversational practices that are disclosive, that have a certain design to them, also psychoactivate certain vertical shifts. Like one of my favorite examples is in the book In Over Our Heads by Robert Keegan. And he gives the example of this guy who was a shipbuilder. So the question, you know, it had to do with teenagers. So teenagers, you know, navigate a very particular, very important developmental shift where they move from being very self-centered to being able to see other people's perspectives. And but it can take a while for that to happen. And so Robert Keegan gives this example of a boat shipbuilder. What he would do is that over the course of the summer, he would hire teenagers to come and, you know, take a course in how to build a boat, right? So they would build a boat from scratch. But the key is that they had to work on teams. And so he would put them in a situational environment that was stressful for them. At first, they would all try to work on their own, and some more than others, right? And after a while, they would start to realize that they couldn't possibly be successful unless they started to really work together. And so if you combine putting people into that sort of developmentally challenging environment with some sort of coaching and some sort of feedback. Like this shipbuilder, they would have little meetings, and he would say, so, and he would give feedback to people and say, so you seem to be having a really hard time working, with your partner. And, have you noticed that? Or I don't know what exactly what he would ask, but there are ways. So you put people into a developmentally challenging situation, but you also provide some sort of conversational engagement that helps people reflect on their experience. And those seem to be the two key important parts of psychoactivating. So I'm feeling the energy very low right now, and I'm feeling a certain pressure to do something about it.
Did you see John's hand up, John?
John, yes, please.
So just so I understand this concept of the Trojan horse, was that, so the example you just gave, was that the Trojan horse of they having to work as a team?
Yes.
Or is it something else? Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So there, the Trojan horse. So the Trojan horse itself was, building this boat. But the story of the Trojan horse is that the Greeks gave I can't remember how this, someone else knows, but I think it was the Greeks that offered Troy this gigantic wooden horse, right? And so Troy wheeled this gigantic horse as a gift, right, as a peace offering, right? And so Troy rolled this big wooden horse into the city walls, and then they went to sleep that night. And overnight, of course, the belly of the wooden horse was filled with Greek soldiers, and so they all came out and they invaded, and they were able to overtake the city of Troy. And so that's the notion of a Trojan horse. And in this case, the Trojan horse itself, the wooden horse itself, was building a ship, and the Greek soldiers was having to work with other people. Same thing with professional coaching. That in professional coaching, ostensibly we're learning new skills and practices, right, for helping other people. But along the way, we start to encounter our own edges. We start to encounter our own need to control. Our own need to try to solve other people's problems. A whole variety of developmental hang-ups that get resolved over the course of our learning to become a professional coach. So that would be another example of psychoactivating. Was that helpful, John?
Yeah, I was just struggling with the metaphor, but I see it now. So thank you.
Sure. All right. So what would be a useful way to kind of finish this? Actually, we're near the end. Let's just end the session, and I'd like to hear, maybe just really quickly, from many of you. I'm leaving this session with, and then whatever you could say in just a word or two. I'm leaving this session with maybe an insight, maybe a aha, maybe a question even.
Okay, I go ahead. Inspiring, joy, and refreshing. So the chat.
Great, thank you.
A sense of a potential inner opening.
I'm leaving this session.
I'm leaving this session with a little bit of fear, not in a bad way, but just trying to figure out what to do.
I'm leaving this session a bit like the hero on the hero's journey at the beginning, trying to dive into the unknown, and a bit afraid too, but challenged and inspired at the same time. So wonderful and crazy feeling.
And I'm leaving curious what's going to happen next.
excited with curious anticipation for what's next.
Clarity and sense of purpose.
I'm leaving this with a refreshed reminder that I have a tendency to want to have the answer, especially when it comes to holding environment, that it's not my answer, it's the environment can be created by the people in it.
For me, it's wondering what will happen next.
I have had a lot of ideas popping up in my head during this, and due to, I think it's a lot of connection between connecting the dots. So I'm leaving inspired and also looking forward to next session. So thank you very much.
So I'm leaving this session with the thought that curiosity from where they are at could be helpful in developmental stretch.
I'm leaving inspired and with an idea to try out in the office tomorrow.
I'm leaving with more questions.
Hi all. I'm inspired and I'm learning.
We have one more minute. Maybe let's hear from at least one person whose voice we haven't heard yet.
I'm leaving inspired what shift I can do somewhere or provide for somebody or more a group, an organization, whatever.
Great, thank you. And I'm leaving with just like a new sense of inspiration for this work, and looking forward to continuing to do this with as many of you as possible. So we'll do another session next week. I'll send a follow-up email tomorrow or the next day, and say something about what will happen in the next session. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking out 2 hours of your precious weekday, and I'll see you next time. Feel free to reach out to me with questions or comments, and so I'll see you around. Okay,
thank you, Michael.
Right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Bye.